I am Ivan Kalmar from the Department of Anthropology, and I'd like to thank all those who have made his visit to the university possible. The sponsors of this event include my own Department of Anthropology, and I'd like to particularly welcome anthropology alumni who are here with us tonight. Other sponsors are the Departments of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations and of Religious Studies and the U of T Multi-Faith Center. We've received important support from Victoria University and its components Victoria College and Emmanuel College. For Emmanuel, sponsoring Professor Ramadan's lecture is part of its ongoing efforts to expand Muslim studies at the university, as seen in the new Emmanuel College Muslim Studies program. I need also to thank our enthusiastic and efficient team of student volunteers, too many to name, but special thanks must go to the head of the volunteer team, Bushra Patel. I need to thank the Muslim Students Association for all their other support as well. And last but not least, my gratitude goes out to Omri Greenberg, who has helped to organize every aspect of Professor Ramadan's visit. Tariq Ramadan is Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at St. Anthony's College, Oxford, and also teaches in the Oxford Faculty of Theology. He is visiting professor at the Faculty of Islamic Studies in Qatar and the University of Malaysia, Perlis, Senior Research Fellow at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan, and Director of the Research Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics in Doha, Qatar. He is the author of a large number of works, some of which will be available for purchase after the lecture. His recent books include Islam and the Arab Awakening, The Arab Awakening, Islam and the New Middle East, The Quest for Meaning, Developing a Philosophy of Pluralism, What I Believe, and Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we've been receiving a tremendous response to this lecture, and we had to stop registration after a very short time. I'm sure that we could have filled Convocation Hall if we had wanted to. The tremendous interest among the university public attests to the impact that Professor Ramadan has had on how we view one of the most pressing issues of the day, the role of Islam in the West and across the globe. Like many of you, I find Professor Ramadan's work not only intellectually stimulating, but also inspiring. For Tariq Ramadan professes tirelessly that the search for truth must, especially today, be informed by and intertwined with not just the tolerance, but the love of our neighbor, the other. Tonight, we're looking forward to Professor Ramadan's lecture entitled Towards a Shared Contemporary Applied Ethics, an Islamic Perspective. Professor Ramadan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivan, for this introduction, this invitation for the university, for you and the students who are involved in this invitation. I'm visiting Toronto almost every year, at least once, and I think it has been a long time, since I came here for a university meeting and lecture, and it's important for me to share with you on the topic that has been chosen this evening around ethics and the shared understanding and in which way we can work, coming from an Islamic perspective, but also dealing with contemporary challenges. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here. I'm just arriving, by the way, just a few hours ago. I just arrived from Europe, so if it's not straight to the point, be kind with me anyway. Let me start with an introduction and three main points when it comes to ethics and why I think it's important, the concept of shared. It's important when it comes to values and when it comes to norms and when it comes to our understanding. In the book, The Quest for Meaning, I allocated one chapter on the notion of ethics for two reasons. First, because we don't agree among the philosophers, we don't agree about the definition and even the source of what we call ethics. And the second is, when you speak Arabic and you come from the Islamic tradition, which is not the only language which you can have a problem, but the concept of ethics, when it is translated into Arabic, or from Arabic the concept of akhlaq, it is not exactly ethics coming from the Greek tradition. So we have a problem of definition. It is important to start with this. I can give you an example in the center that I'm chairing in Qatar about Islamic legislation and ethics. The first session that we had was on bioethics with 4 scholars of the text and 4 scholars of the context, and we were challenging, a specific issue with Bichon from Georgetown University and scholars coming from the Muslim background. And it was quite clear that from the beginning there was something which was not clear about the topic, what was the topic. And the perception for scholars is, when it comes to ethics, we talk about the behavior of people, which is not exactly what we are talking about. So what I mean by ethics here, just to be clear, and you can get a sense of the whole discussion when it comes to ethics. The first problem that we have is there a difference between morality and ethics? And Paul Ricoeur, trying to summarize the whole discussion in the Western philosophical tradition, was saying that what we can agree upon is morality is coming mainly from a top-down understanding, mainly from the religious field, while ethics was understood by the philosophers as something which is coming from the common intellectual production. So it's the common rationality. By the way, not all the philosophers agree on this, and the first is the Protestant tradition saying, no, there is a Protestant ethics and the Christian ethics, and I'm talking about Islamic ethics. So what is important for me is first to say morality is coming from the Roman, from the Latin, and ethics is coming from the Greek. So I'm not making a difference as to this understanding, even though if we come to the philosophical discussion, there is this discussion that the way we were dealing with morality is, or it's coming from the religious tradition, while it's the same word. In fact, when we talk about ethics, we are talking about what is right and what is good and what is bad. And the ethical, the Greek tradition was mainly, and the way we were using the concept from ethics was the common rationality. And my main point is this one, is that when we come to the philosophical tradition, we'll find that on this first, there is an overlapping dimension coming from rationality and coming from the scriptural sources. So we need to solve the problem first. Are we talking about something which is coming only from rationality, or are we talking about something which is coming from scriptural sources? And if it's coming from scriptural sources, what is the relationship between the scriptural sources and common rationality? And this is where we are going to talk about the shared understanding and the shared potential definition and implementation. Second thing which is important when it comes to ethics, and it's already in what I have been saying right now, is we can't talk about anything which has to do with an ethical perspective if we don't start talking about the concept of human being. And very often when we have interface dialogue or dialogue between philosophical traditions with atheists, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and Hindus and others, there is something that is missing in our understanding. It's as if we think that we agree on what a human being is, which is wrong. We don't. And the very essence of if you have an understanding, it's a very simple thing, but it's important, between the three monotheistic traditions. If you start by thinking about human being from a perspective that could be, for example, the Rousseauist tradition saying human beings by definition are good, is the social relationship that make them bad. Or Hobbes saying, no, that's the opposite. Human beings are by definition bad, and they are trying to be better. But at the end, they will never be really better, because they are bad. And if you come from the Christian tradition and with the diversity of interpretations of what is the original sin, is something which also has to do with human being. If by definition you come with an understanding that there is something in the human being which is bad, which is directed towards sin first, and then you have this is part of the nature after the fall, this is also a way you deal with it. Now come to the Greek tradition with Socrates. When, for example, he's talking about the soul and he's talking about the body. If you listen and you try to understand carefully, there is something which is the soul, because of its origin, is good. The body, because of its origin, is potentially bad. And it's because the soul is entrapped into the body that the soul can lose the first ideal dimension coming from the world of ideas and the world of the great values. So this jailed soul is losing its definition, its essence, while trapped in the body. But it means, in fact, in moral terms, that you are qualifying the body and you are qualifying the soul. So it's a concept of human being that we have to discuss. Now, if you come to the Islamic tradition, we don't have this, and it's very close to the Jewish tradition on this, which is not exactly this. It's not that the soul is morally qualified per se, or the body morally qualified per se. It's not the soul which is good and the body which is wrong or bad. It's the way you are going to deal with the body and the way you are going to deal with the soul. In the Islamic tradition, the soul could be bad. In النفس لأمارة بالسوء means the soul could be bad. And it's through an educative process, is when you are conscious of your soul and try to make it good, that you can have a good concept of human beings. So the moral qualification is never on things and elements. It's on action and behavior. So the body per se, it's not bad. It's not the moral qualification. So I think that here, we may agree or not, but we need to have this kind of discussion, which is missing today in our interfaith dialogue. We talk about at the periphery of our traditions, not from the center. And you know, it's not only a theological discussion, but it's also the way you deal with the philosophical tradition, as I mentioned right now, the Greek tradition. So now if we come to definitions, we see that we have a problem when we have to define. When we talk about the concept of human beings, we understand that we might have to take this into account and to try to get a better understanding of what we are talking about when it comes to ethics and applied ethics. And then, as I said, the last big discussion and great discussion which is necessary is, as I said at the beginning, is the sources of ethics when it comes to the way we deal with our contemporary world. At the end of the day, in the name of what? What is the justification for you to say to something, no, I can't do it. I can't make that. I can't do this. This is wrong. What is the source of your reference here? And this is where, once again, we come back to the big question about the relationship between faith and reason. So is it rational? Is it a religious take? And why do you say no to things? And why do you say no to some behavior? So these are questions that are coming out of this discussion. Now, let me come to the Islamic perspective on this, because I think that if we come to the shared dimension on ethics, it's important to understand that our shared universality doesn't mean that we are forgetting where we are coming from. So the universal cannot erase or deny the fact that we are all coming from a particular background, and you have to be clear on this. I really have a problem with this kind of people from the Islamic perspective, or from the Western perspective, or from the Christian, Jewish, or whatever, claiming that their values are universal and in fact taking over. It's just a power struggle. Once I was talking to, it's normal for someone who is coming from a rational background, a Jewish background, Christian or Muslim background, say, okay, I think my values are universal. Of course you think so. Of course. If not, what is the point of being a believer? But the point is, how do you talk about the universal? It's important. And this is why, once again, in the book, The Quest for Meaning, I'm using the image of the metaphor of the mountain, that there are many roots and that at the top we can share. But don't look at the mountain from the top. Look at the mountain from the valley, meaning that have an intellectual modesty and humility when it comes to, okay, there are many roots coming to the top. Because if you put yourself from the top, you are looking at the mountain from the side of God. And you say, okay, that's my universal, and it's the universal. The only universal I know is the shared universal, is the top accepting, acknowledging the fact that there are many roots coming to this. But still, how do you explain your roots? How are you going to translate this into something which is understandable for other traditions? Because the point that you have a specific root doesn't mean that it's not explainable. It has to be. So the shared universal should make every one of us ready to explain her or his specific roots. This is why it's a shared universal. Because if you come from nowhere and you come straight to the top, that's not going to make interface and diversity possible in our daily life. And this is why, for many Western Muslims, my problem with them today is you don't explain your roots. You are not explaining your path. You are coming with values, you say these are the Islamic values, and then it's as if it's less rational or reasonable or rational than any other tradition. And in fact, the problem with the Islamic tradition today in the West is to translate this, being faithful to the core and the heart of the Islamic tradition, is to make it understandable for people. Means you have first to get an overall understanding of the Islamic message, get the translation, the words, because it's coming from the Arabic. So the way we translate Arabic words and terminology into English or Western languages, this is critical. And then to do this, having in mind that you come from somewhere, but you talk to people coming from somewhere else. So in order to translate who you are or from where you come, it's important to understand who they are and from where they come, and which is sometimes a gap in our dialogue. So the first thing which is important, and by the way, this is not to say that it was not there in the West. You know, when we heard the Pope Benedict XVI saying once in Europe, and when he talked to Europeans, he talked to Canadians and to the West, saying that the roots of Europe are Greek and Christian. He is doing something here which is problematic. Because I can understand, and I said this, we had a dialogue 2 years ago in Rome, I can understand that there is a fear of the Muslim presence in the West, because it's as if they are practicing and present. That's fine. I don't have a problem with fear. I have a problem when fears are translating and reassessing the past in a way which is not right. It's not true. The roots of Europe are not only Greek and Christians, and first, you can't avoid talking about the Jewish tradition first. And then the Islamic tradition are part of the European conscience and the European legacy. This is the starting point. You cannot, because you are scared of the present, reduce the past. So my take on this is sometimes when we talk about what we are talking about here, about ethics, it's quite interesting not only to study philosophy, but to study history. Because there is a lack of memory in the way we deal with our own values. And there is a dark hole in our memory. It's as if the Jewish tradition, now the Jewish tradition after the Second World War was integrated with it. Because in fact, the way you deal with the past is always also a way you deal with the other. By saying us in the narrative, we say who is in and who is out. So when you say us, the Judeo-Christian tradition, it means that others are not in. While I think it to come to the past, you understand that that's not true. I'm saying this because the dialogue that is needed today in our Western countries and around the world has also to do with the ideological use of history. The way we are neglecting some contributions and part of the construction of the Western identity, the European identity, as well as the North American identity. In many ways, not only with Islam, but this is just a revealing process. When it comes to the Islamic perspective now and our understanding of ethics, what is essential in the Islamic tradition is that first, the concept of human being, as I said, is we don't qualify elements, we qualify behavior. And this is coming from the scriptural source, the Quran, saying, in fact, your soul and your body are going to be morally what you are going to do out of them. Is the way you behave. So it has to do with your conscience. And your conscience and your intellect are going to be driven or influenced or nurtured or educated by two sources. The first is rationality. So there is, from the very essence of the Islamic tradition, something which is trusting the human rationality. And it's because there is a trust in the human rationality that there is revelation. If there is no revelation, there is no trust in human rationality. Why? Because to get the very meaning of the revelation, you need a mind to read it. So very often in the scriptural sources you have Ya ulul albab, or who are full of insight, and the people who are understanding and they are thinking. So the very essence of Islam, and this is why if you look at the Islamic tradition from the very beginning, we didn't have at the beginning of the Islamic tradition, of the Islamic history, something which was be cautious with rationality. It came afterward. But at the beginning is our rationality is the element that is making us human beings. And then through this rationality and this conscience, you have to educate yourself. And this is the very meaning of the first word that was revealed in the Quran, اقرأ باسم ربك. Read in the name of God. Read means read the world and read the scriptures. So read means you have to understand. You have to get this understanding. Now, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 12th century. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, you don't know much about him. And in fact, if you are true to the Western rational or rationalist tradition, anyone who knows about Descartes and doesn't know about Ghazali has something which is missing in his culture or her culture. Have you heard about Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 12th century? In fact, we know now that René Descartes, the French philosopher, who was at the beginning, and not the only one, but at the beginning of what was called in the 17th century, the rationalist tradition in philosophy. In fact, he read Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and he had something which was written on the margin of one of the books. And Abu Hamid al-Ghazali is the one in one of the critical work, a book that you have it now in English, is Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. It's the reference from darkness. a book where he is talking about the relationship between the scriptures, the intellect, and doubt. He's talking about doubt. And in fact, he is putting doubt as a necessary step to get knowledge and to go towards the revelation. And saying there is a gap between the revelation and the doubt and the intellect, but we need this to get to understand faith. And in fact, he's constructing something which is essential, is the relationship between faith and reason. And in another book, it's not a book, it's volumes called Ihya Ulumuddin, Revivification of his Religious Sciences. He's writing something which is important when it comes to revelation. He said, the book is an outward revelation. Your intellect is an inward revelation. Meaning, in fact, your intellect can produce values, norms, and principles. And the scriptural sources are coming to do this as well. So, in fact, the scriptures are talking to your mind is understanding the scriptures, and the two are sources of morality and ethics. So it means that you are not going to find everything in the book, but the book is the light, the mind is the means. But the means could be the source. You get that? This is the starting point of his understanding of the relationship between intellect, doubt, and faith. Exactly what you will find in the Descartes tradition. So the hypertrophic doubt and all this tradition, it's not coming from someone who was alone thinking in France or in the Netherlands. It's coming from a dialogue between traditions. But it's as if all this dialogue was completely neglected in our history of philosophy. In fact, you can get a PhD in philosophy, you don't know anything about the Jewish and the Christian and the Jewish and the Muslim traditions. It's as if they don't exist. And I think that here it's in the Islamic tradition, something which is important is when it comes to ethics, the two sources of ethics are the scriptural sources and the human intellect. In fact, something that you will find also in a very interesting book that was written at the beginning of the 20th century by Henri Bergson, Les deux sources de la morale et de la religion, the two sources of morality and religions. And he's talking about this, the process of religion and societies. But in this, it's important that we'll find that in the very old mainstream Islamic tradition, we have this relationship between faith and reason as the two main sources. Faith means, I believe that this book is coming from God. This is what I mean by this. And it means that if you think that this book is coming from God, the book is going to give you some principles. But there is another dimension also, which is when you put the book and when you put the reason, there is a third dimension that is not very often talked about, but it's very critical in the mystical tradition, in the Sufi tradition. And the most important traditions in Islam that produce ethics, in fact, is the mystical tradition, or the Sufi. Why? Because in al-Akhlaq, they were always saying, there is no rule, never, without the spiritual meaning. And the spiritual meaning has always to do with al-akhlaq, which is in fact the good behavior. It's so much the case that you come to one Islamic tradition where it is said, when the messenger said once, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, I was sent but to complete the good behavior. In fact, the essence of his mission is the good behavior. So you pray, you fast, whatever you do in your life, at the end, the parameter is your behavior. And your behavior is not the outward behavior. It's how much you are at peace with yourself, with it. And the starting point is self-justice, is to be just with your own self. So here, it's not enough, in fact, in the Islamic tradition. And anyone who is dealing with the Jewish tradition and the Kabbalah and the Christian mystical tradition and the Buddhist tradition will see something which is important here, which has to do, the source is the text, the rational or the intellect, the rational source, but also your heart. as something which is the spiritual dimension. Why? Because your heart understands as much as your mind understands, not the same way, not with the same light, with the same in-depth. I'm saying this because in the mystical tradition, you will see that from the very beginning there is something which has to do with this understanding that everything in Islam is about ethics. And the starting point is the relationship between your heart and your ethical behavior. This is the connection. So you can see I'm very deep in the Islamic tradition, but anyone who has studied the other traditions, and I talk to a Buddhist, I talk to a Jew, I talk to a Christian, I say, it rings a bell. I understand what you mean. And why? Because this is where our wording, the way things should be reconstructed in our understanding of ourselves, it's important to get this, to get at the center. But when you come to your center, you should not lose sight of the centers of others, the way they are using the words, the way you are understanding their own universal reference. So this is one dimension. Now the second dimension when it comes to, so I spoke about the concept of human being, the second is faith, reason, and heart. And the last dimension that I want to tackle here is a relationship which is very important. And in this, the Islamic tradition is very much in between the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. And in fact, all together in the light also of the Greek tradition and the Western philosophical tradition. And I don't have time to do this now, but I would say that the one who is exposing this in the best way, I talked about it once again in the book, The Quest for Meaning, is Hegel. Because Hegel is, before Marx, coming with a sense of history, but the way he is dealing with universal values, the way he's dealing with the spirit in history is something which is very, very interesting when you understand the monotheistic tradition, the Jewish as much as the Christian, and because he didn't talk about this. You know, what is interesting with the Hegel understanding of everything is double, itself and something else, doesn't work in Arabic because you don't have the verb being, to be. It's not in Arabic. When you speak in Arabic, you go beyond. Anyway, that's another story. But what I wanted to say here is he is the one who might be the most interesting, very complex, very difficult to read, but very deep to expose or to present this relationship between the three dimensions. On one point is the legal dimension. When it comes to ethics and when it comes to the legal tradition, normally what we expect is the norms, the ethical norms, to be translated into the legal framework in one way or in another. In fact, law should be the translation of norms for our living together in the way we deal with an organized society. So there is something which has to do with the legal dimension. And if you come to the Islamic tradition, this is where the problem could raise, because, and it is now the problem. The first Islamic science is not theology. And by the way, even if you read the book Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, I'm challenging the fact that we can speak so easily about it in Islamic theology. Because very often what you say about God can be said only because this is what he's saying about himself. It's not a human construct. But this is another discussion. It's, when it comes to the first Islamic science, we deal with law and jurisprudence, what is known in Arabic as al-fiqh. And we have to be very cautious with this, because very often Muslims, when they speak in English, they say fiqh is jurisprudence. That's not true. Fiqh is the legal system plus jurisprudence, meaning the way we deal with new challenges. But it's law. It's the human translation of law in our contemporary world. I'm saying this because often Muslims are coming with a very simplistic definition of two terms, is to say Sharia is law, fiqh is jurisprudence. No. Sharia is law for jurists. They are reducing Sharia into law because this is their job. This is what they are. But Sharia is the way for mystics. Sharia is the way for human beings. Sharia is much more open than this. It's not the legal dimension. Sharia is the way towards faithfulness, much more than only the legal framework. And anyone who is coming with a very simplistic definition of Sharia, this is God's law, no. And the problem that we have here is that the Muslims themselves, they don't translate the concepts in the right way. They very quickly take what is said by some Orientalists or by a very narrow understanding of Islam. Some traditions, the literalists, are coming sometimes with very narrow understanding. And you know what I said, by the way, just I want to make this clear in academic terms. What I said about faith, rationality, and heart. Be careful. This is not representing all the Muslim traditions. We have literalists, they would say, never. The only source of morality is the text. The literalists are saying this. So I want you to make it clear that when I'm talking about the mainstream, I'm not talking about everyone. I would have even some Muslims, literalist Muslims, who would say what you said now is putting you outside Islam. So to talk about, I'm not using the concept of orthodox, I'm talking about the concept of mainstream, the majority, from the Shia and the Sunni tradition. But we have to be clear. This is not representing all the Muslims. This is not the only understanding. Now, what I am saying is that the first science is Islamic law and jurisprudence. And in fact, it's what? It's to determine what is permissible and what is not. What we have in Arabic is al-halal wal-haram. It's the licit and the illicit. So this is the framework that we have, and this was the first. Why? It was, in fact, the direct translation of the legal framework into our life. And the scholars, very quickly, they said there are two sets of legal references. When it comes to our relationship with God, our creed, al-aqidah, and when it comes to the way we pray, the way we fast, is al-ibadat, the rituals, you can do but what is written. Listen to this. Now you are going to get me right if you understand what I said at the beginning. The Torah sources can be the intellect and the scriptural sources. They would say there is one field, the only reference when it comes to what is right and permissible is the texts. Is when we talk about our creed, the 6 pillars of faith, and the 5 pillars of our practices, our rituals, the way we pray, the way we fast, the way we have to give zakat, the social purifying tax, and the way we perform the pilgrimage. You do here only what is written. So if you want to tell me, no, you can pray like this, say no, give me a text showing me how I can pray. Now there is another category which has to do with social affairs, what is known in Arabic mu'amalat. And here you can do whatever you want except if there is a text telling you you can't. It's exactly the other methodology. Here you do but what is written. Here your rationality is open. Do whatever you want, but if there is a text telling you you don't do this, you can't. I give you an example. You know that there is a text telling you you can't drink alcohol. So this is the mainstream unanimous position. I know that I heard some saying if you travel to the West you can. So the pick and choose tradition exists, but that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, you can't. But when you arrive in Canada and you are in this country, you have all these drinks. Everything is possible except alcohol. You understand? It's very simple. It means the permission is open except with what is prohibited. And it's like this with everything. What you do with drinks, you can do it with everything, as long as you don't have a text. So you understand here that you can't just rely on the text if you want to deal with ethics in that field. You have to make your mind. You have to think about the objectives. So in this, when it comes to the Islamic legal tradition here, we have two methodologies and two ways of dealing with ethical ground. There is one field, we are not going to discuss it because it's as it is written, and we are not going to change that. Now there is a field here when we need to come with, when we deal with the legal framework. And what the scholars were trying to do is, how am I going to deal with limits? And in fact, 4 elements are important. The first is one they read within the text with a prohibition. So, for example, we cannot drink alcohol. What does it mean when we are going to deal with things that were not written in the Quran and the scriptural sources? Smoking, for example. So to get an understanding, a response on smoking, you have to come back to why, for example, we have some prohibitions on some way of dealing with, drinking, and then the scholars were trying to get the very meaning of the law, of al-hukm, or of the way we deal with the prohibition. And in fact, they went to 4 elements. The first is, behind a prohibition there is what we call a illa, which is a raison d'être. Why? Because there is a reason for that. So you need to try to get the reason. Why do you don't drink? Because you are losing your mind, because in excess this is bad, and you have it even in the Quran. Excess of drinking is not good for you, so avoid it. So we have a raison d'être. So it's not good for your health, it's not good for your intellect. By analogy, if you go to smoking, it's not in the text, but you are going to say, okay, to smoke, it's not good for your health, and it's not good for your pocket. Because you are putting money to destroy your health, while other people are not having enough money just to eat. In ethical terms, you have an answer here by analogy. In legal terms, some scholars are going to say, no, you can't smoke because it's as bad as drinking. And some others say, no, try to avoid it. I cannot say it's impossible, or it's prohibited, but I say it's makruh, detestable. It's something that you have to avoid. But my point here is, first with a legal thing, is to try to get the raison d'être. Scholars were also saying, what is the wisdom behind? It's not exactly the same as the raison d'être. There is a wisdom. And the wisdom is not only coming from your mind. The wisdom is coming from your heart. You get that? It's the wisdom. Why? So there is one thing which is, could be explained. Third dimension, scholars were asking why. It's not why as to the raison d'être, is the objective. What are we trying to reach with this law or this hukm? And some others were saying, sometimes we have a law with no explanation. There is no reason. And in fact, the reason is that there is no reason. And it's good for you to sometimes have a prohibition or an obligation without reason. Why is it important for the scholar that some law are coming from the text and they are not rational? And what is understood here is to get through the text something which is called intellectual humility, that you are not going to get it all, that it's coming from God. Sometimes you don't know why, but there is a reason, or there is a wisdom, or there is an objective. And it comes from the very beginning. The 4th revelation in the Quran is starting with Noon, وَالْقَلَمِ وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ. Noon, it's a letter. Even the messenger was unable to tell us the meaning of this letter. Meaning, the Quran is calling you for knowledge, and at the same time saying, but be careful, you're not going to get it all. It's coming from God. So it's something which is important. Why? But intellectual humility means when you start in ethics with intellectual humility, it has also to do with your judgment at the end. Intellectual humility at the beginning is be less judgmental at the end, because it might be that you don't know. So it's a mindset. Ethics has not only to do with these answers, it's the mindset, the psychology, the way you deal with your own intelligence and your own, and it's essential here. Because this is where you have your mind to understand, you should have your heart to forgive and to be compassionate. Ethics has to do with this. But compassion and forgiveness means at the beginning that there is something that you're avoiding, which is arrogance. And the most difficult arrogance is the intellectual arrogance, when you think you know. Because it's written. We have sometimes this with some literalists. They are quoting the Quran, for example. Oh, you know, I had to deal sometimes in interfaith dialogue with some, you know, dogmatic minds in the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, even in the Buddhist tradition when I was in Dharamsala. Some say, oh, you can't talk. It's very tough. And some Muslims, this is the way they are. In fact, they are quoting the text with something which is a kind of intellectual arrogance. No humility here. No, it's not me who is saying this. It's God. So no distance between what they are saying or they are reading and their intellectual interpretation. So when it comes to the legal tradition, and we understand what I just saying here, intellectual humility in the way we deal with the law, sometimes you have a reason, sometimes you have a wisdom, sometimes you have objective, sometimes you have nothing. And you have to deal with this. And this is where it's important in the legal tradition, which is not always the case now, to reconnect the legal framework with ethics. Why? Because ethics is always asking you the reason, the objectives. Why? Why this law? Why this prohibition? Why this obligation? And in fact, ethics is giving and should be giving to the legal system a meaning based on objectives and reasons when it comes to human beings. Why are we dealing like this with human beings, and what do we want to reach, and what are our objectives here? And this is why, once again, all the mystics and the mystical traditions, as they are saying, in fact, at the end of the day, all the legal framework, our legal framework, is just here to do what? To help us to be better, so purification of the self. And we have it in the Quran, كَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا فِيكُمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْكُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِنَا وَيُزَكِّيكُم. So you have to read the text and then to purify yourself. And the mystical traditions say, look, he said it just after reading the text, purifying yourself. So the ethical has to do with the inner dimension. And then understanding the text to change the world. And the point here is the ethical tradition is helping us to understand that we should not understand the law without getting the law in the light of the objectives, which is in maqasid. So the spiritual dimension, when it comes to the legal framework, is helping us to understand that be careful not to understand the law without thinking about the norms, the ethical ground. So this is where Islam is also pushing us, our understanding is pushing us to come to this understanding. And for example, to reconcile ourselves with thinking about the goals, thinking about the ends, thinking about the objectives in order not to lose the means, the meaning, and to understand how to use the means. There is a gap now in the Islamic tradition very often because we are focused on the legal framework and we forget the objectives and we forget the reasons, and sometimes we don't get the meaning, why we are doing this. So the ethical dimension is helping us reconcile the rituals and the rules with the meanings and the concept of human being. By doing this from within, this is where we can come or go a step further and try now to come to a better understanding of our relationship with the other traditions. And this is where we need this. To be a witness in your own tradition is to get that, but this is what I would expect from a Jew, from a Christian, from a Buddhist, from an atheist, from an agnostic. He or she can tell me I don't have a text to rely on, but you have your mind, you are coming from somewhere. So what are the objectives? What do you want to achieve? What is your concept of human being and what do you want to achieve? So the starting point of a shared ethics is to talk first about our concept of human being and what do we want to achieve. When it is said in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we gave dignity to human being. We all talk about dignity, all of us, coming from the rationalist, atheist, agnostic, monotheistic traditions, we all, Buddhist tradition, we all talk about human dignity. So this is the starting point. At the end of the day, when we are in our societies, we have interpersonal relationships. We want to protect our human dignity. And then we talk about justice. And I'm not going very far in all this discussion. You know, we have different understanding of, that's true that we have different theories of justice. But the basic principles of what justice is, when it is before law, when it is in the way we deal with the life of human beings, men and women, these basic elements, we should start with this and then go further in our understanding and our implementation. And when we come from this, as I told you at the beginning, I'm sure that someone who is not at all coming from the Islamic tradition, what I'm saying here is something that, okay, we have something which is like this in our tradition. So we have different roots, and where we can come together is acknowledging all these dimensions and translating this into a language which is articulated or articulating all the dimensions of our respective tradition. And this is what I try to do with the Islamic perspective here. Having said that, now it's all good. You can say, have a concept of human being. The sources could be 2 or 3. The objectives that we can find, it's coming from our mind, it's coming from the scriptural sources. We have these objectives that are structured. Now, what can we do together in ethical terms? And what do we have to do when it comes to our life? Let me put it that way. The first is the main objective on ethical, from an ethical perspective in Islam when it comes to the individual. It's 2 things. You know, before writing the book on the messenger, I wrote a book on the messenger, I was used to say that the main objective of Islam is justice. And I was wrong. In fact, justice is a means, is a condition for something which is beyond that. And I would say that the very essence of the ethical teaching in Islam when it comes to the individual has nothing to do with first peace. Peace is a condition for, justice is a condition for peace. In fact, the main objective is peace. Is how do you get this inner peace? And in fact, this inner peace is based on justice. You have it in the Quran. Allahumma dhalamna anfusana. We have been unjust with our own self. So to be unjust with your own self, you will never get peace. So the ultimate goal is peace. And in fact, when we come to this understanding is ethics in individual terms has to do how do we get this, the main objective is ethics. Is peace with ethics, and how do you get this? So this is where, for example, when it comes to our discussion, if we talk to other traditions, people coming from the atheist and agnostic, and as I said in the book, A Philosophy of Pluralism, the quest for meaning, I'm touching on that by saying, okay, let us come to our understanding of how do we deal with ethics when it comes to the individuals. What are the elements that we need to come together in applied ethics that we can agree upon, that are so essential? And the first is what we have in the Islamic tradition and what we find everywhere is the protection of the integrity of the human being. meaning that what is important for us is in a contemporary Islamic applied ethics or shared applied ethics, we need to come to understanding how can we protect the very essence of what is a human being. So we come with something which is the basic, but it's so important. A human being should have what is necessary to live, not only to survive. So it means that our understanding on this, it's a very basic thing, but it's essential in our understanding. Let us start with this. When it comes to poverty, poverty from an ethical perspective is a human scandal. That's simply not acceptable to put people or to accept that our societies are not only in southern country, but you have in Canada people who are living in a state which is just unacceptable. The starting point of a shared applied ethics is to come to the individuals to say, okay, is this right when it comes to our concept of human being? Poverty are being marginalized, and for example, the way you deal with what gives the individual a sense of dignity in our societies is to get a job. And this applied ethics is something which is transforming ethics not on the margin of our understanding. You know, I was in the European Commission for Ethics and Applied Ethics. Sometimes it's as if you have the impression that you are not in real life. You are talking about, you know, things that are very, very focused. But okay, you know, medical ethics and applied ethics in medicine, that's all fine. But when it comes to real life, it's just let us be at the center and challenge our societies when it comes to ethics, just about the individuals. Something which is essential. There is no dignity protected if there is no education when it comes to the individual. And this is where, instead of being in competition between, between two religious traditions, let us come to the shared applied ethics here when it comes to what about individuals? The dignity, something that you shouldn't accept as Canadian citizens and North American citizens on the individuals. It's unacceptable in any way when it comes to something which is common to every one of us here. I'm coming from a Muslim tradition. You are coming from a Christian. You can be coming from a Jewish, or you may not have a religion. But we should agree, based on our intelligence and our common understanding of human beings, that torture should never be accepted. Torture, it's not acceptable. While you have a movie now explaining, you know, with this capture of bin Laden, that torture was used, and we are normalizing torture. In fact, the most dangerous thing is happening in the West today, which was not new. It's not new, but with media coverage and the power of what now is spread around with internet, alternative media, is something which is, it's as if in our minds we now are accepting the fact that some people have less values than some others. That I'm sorry, even if a terrorist, even a potential terrorist, has the right to be judged and not to be tortured. So this is applied ethics in our daily life. I'm sorry, I'm not talking about something which is far from where you are. You have in Canada people who are in jail. They don't know why they are in jail. They are potentially terrorists. But the potential is everything. So you can be jailed potentially. So you are really jailed for potential reasons, which is scary in ethical terms. But it's legal. And this is the point. What if what is legal is not ethical when it comes to our individual life. And this is where ethics should challenge even the legal framework. I'm giving you an example from an Islamic perspective. We have in Islam the way some eat halal meat. Halal meat is the way we slaughter the animal. It's legal. So legally, when it's slaughtered the right way, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, this is what you have to say, this is legal, halal, you can eat it. But in ethical terms, we don't ask the question how the animal was treated before, mistreated. No ethical ground on this. So if you come to with the legal framework, something could be halal, but deeply unethical. So I think that this is why we have to challenge this. So an ethical ground is about the individual, something which is important, and then we have to come to this. So I don't want the ethical discussion to be only theoretical. I mean it when I'm saying at the beginning, I was saying at the beginning of this talk, that we need to come with very deep understanding of human beings, sources, a very deep philosophical, we need this. We need not to be in a hurry when it comes to this. But from this, we have to come to something which is practical implementation. So to be the ethical voices in our societies, to question even the legal framework within which we live. Because if we know how much populism is dangerous, and the most dangerous thing for any ethical thinking is the populist trend. Because populism, by definition, is emotional. And in the name of emotion, you can change everything. We have it in the UK with Tony Blair saying the rules of the game have changed. He was right, but not for the better. Not for the better, because you are nurturing the fear. So this is where, on the individual dimension, we have to come with something which is, it's a responsibility. I would say it's a civic responsibility. It's a citizen's responsibility to come with the ethical questioning and say, okay, when it comes to human beings, we need to come to this. I was not happy. It's a surprise. I was not happy when bin Laden was killed. I was not happy when Gaddafi was killed. I said, I don't support this. I was very critical towards Gaddafi. I was very critical towards the rhetoric of Osama bin Laden. I said, I'm sorry. The way you can be happy with killing people don't make me happy. Because they have to be arrested if possible and judged if possible and treated with dignity. Our dignity is to treat with dignity even the undignified behavior. And I'm talking about undignified behavior because I would never, and this is part of the ethical judgment, judge a being. I judge acts. The being I don't know. Because I know myself, I'm very cautious with judging people, judging behaviors by saying this is unacceptable. So this, I think, it's a discussion that it's needed now because there is a crisis in our ethical references. And we have to be very, very aware that sometimes we are hiding behind the legal dimension. In Islam, it's quite clear, halal, haram. And in our societies by saying we are living in democracies. And that's true. No one can deny the fact that in Canada, the democratic system is much better than in many, many other countries. The point is not the democratic systems, is what could be nurtured within a democratic system that could make us accept things that are ethically unacceptable in democratic terms. So this is what I'm talking about when it comes to this. And I would say here that we need to go a step further and to reconcile all this production and coming from our different roots to the summit and share together what would be applied ethics or shared ethics in the social dimension. And the social dimension, once again, is beyond, personal education, as I was saying about, for example, in the job market, when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to something which is essential. At the end of the day, once again, you should be free to behave the way you want and to dress the way you want. In social terms, how are you going, for example, to assess the empowerment of women? And I was saying this about after the Arab awakening. It was called the Arab Spring and Arab revolutions. I'm not using these terms. For me, it's just an Arab awakening. And in the book, I was just trying to assess the situation. What will give empowerment in women there as much as here in Canada? The way they dress? No. Two things. Access to education and access to job market. If you can be financially autonomous, this is empowerment. But the way I dress, who are you to tell me I don't have to dress like this? Who are you? Do you have the ultimate essence of freedom? Do you know what freedom should be? As a sociologist once was telling me in France, to say, you know, it's impossible that a free woman would dress like that. I said, how do you know that? How do you know the way the people are, you know, because it's coming from the heart, it's coming from the conscience. This is none of your business. Your business is same rights. And on ethical ground, something that we have to struggle for, even in Canada, same skills, same salary. This is ethical. It's not only to get the job, it's the same salary. These are ethical questions that we have. It's not to accept behind the legal system, say, okay, it's democracy, it's works, but in fact it doesn't. Why? Because there is still something in our mind that the skills and the way we deal with women in nature is something which is problematic, is less right, not so much equity. So if you think about it, historically speaking, how come a woman who has the same skills, the same competence, get 20% less than men? If you think about it, in fact, it's the concept of human being and the concept of women in our mind which is problematic. And by the way, the Muslims are good at that. In cultural terms, not coming from the religious reference, but we have this, and it's everywhere. In fact, it's transcultural. So we have to challenge this in ethical terms as well and ask the right question. And in the Arab, awakening after this, these are ethical questions that we have to ask. And two other dimensions that we also have to question, and this is where I don't want to mix religion with everything, and I'm not advocating dogmatic minds coming, but I think that the ethical positioning should question all the human behaviors and activities. We need more ethics in economy. We need more ethics in politics. We need more ethics in medicine, for example. There is an ideology that is telling you when you deal with science, there is no ideology. So it's very ideological to think that there is no ideology in sciences. And some within academia, they like it and say, no, this is science. Okay. No ideology? No. Science. Knowledge. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Anyone who is starting by saying that he's not part of an ideology, you may have to look at it twice and to look for it, because somewhere there is something here. But when it comes to science, we need really to go very far in questioning in ethical terms. And recently, when I was telling you we have on bioethics, we ended up in a discussion with one as a Muslim scholar, Sheikh al-Raisuni. We were talking about bioethics. How do you deal with very specific situation in bioethics, just the borderline situation, when you are dealing with, a doctor with a patient, and it's as if everything is there. Medicine now is a business, and medicine has to do with economy. Why the South African people don't get medicine now when it has to do with AIDS? It's about business. It's about transnational pharmaceutical corporation keeping their privileges, which is legal, but it's unethical. because this is where we have to challenge the system. And then at one point he stopped and said, what is medicine at the end of the day? It's as if we are going into so very focused details that the big picture of what is medicine, a service, what is a human being, what is health, how do you deal with this? I would say that these are the ethical questions that we have to address to sciences today, because sciences without ethics could be, it was said by Rabelais in the 17th century, but I think that this is also a question that we have to ask together. My conclusion here is we can't do this on our own. We should come to this discussion within our respective traditions, yes. Jews with Jews, Christians with Christians. We need this. This is intra-community discussion. Muslims with Muslims. We have a big problem of a lack of intra-community discussion. But when it comes to our societies now, when it comes, for example, with the way we deal with all the sciences that can destroy the world, environment, education, our school systems, we should ask ethical questions. So which type of citizens are you trying to produce? Because it's as if it's a production. To educate. These are questions where we have to come together. And the secular system, it's not to avoid talking about ethics and to put religions aside. It's a neutral space where we have to talk about this. We have to be at the center of what a society is. A secular society without ethics is coming back to the Machiavellian positioning on politics. Is let's morality and let us go with, the way we deal with instruments. And it's dangerous. And if you come to this discussion, you can see that atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Hindu, monotheistic tradition, we all have the same concerns, but we are apart. We are not sharing. We are not coming to this shared dimension where we need to talk about the essential issues. So this is where I would say that the ethical ground is where we can come together and we have to work together. And it's a great responsibility. It's a great responsibility. So I have now, over the last few years, focused all my work on Islamic legislation and ethics, but I am inviting scholars from other in the center. You have the leaflets there. You can, and any one of you who is interested in ethics and applied ethics, we need you, whatever is your tradition and your philosophical background. We are working on 10 fields. But this is where I'm putting all my effort. Why? Because I think that instead of talking about, the way I talk about God, the way I talk about, my prayer, that's all good. We have to do this. But we have to go a step further and come with a common ethics means common responsibility. In all these fields, in when we deal with politics as much as when we deal with media, this is something that we have to do together. And acknowledging once again, as I said, that we are coming from different routes, different paths, but we have common ground, and we even have to challenge some of the values that we may have, but at the end of the day is also to translate this into reality. Ethics is not a philosophical discussion to have, it's a philosophical discussion to start with and to end with implementation, and by challenging the human behavior of our societies. Now, because even in democratic society, let me give you some, about the secular dimension. When I'm talking like this, say, oh, you want to reinvest society with religion. No, I want to reinvest or to come again within our society with philosophical, ethical questions that we have to address. Yes, I think that this is needed. When the people are telling you, I will end with this. I wrote the book on the Arab Awakening, and this is all what I'm saying here is the center of a book that I called about radical reform. And many Muslims, they were saying, oh, where is he heading? Exactly there, radical reform. I said, do you want to reform Islam? No, I don't want to reform Islam. I'm reforming the Muslim minds. It's your mind, my problem. It's not Islam. So this is why we need to go towards this, and we need to, and in this, addressing, for example, the secular, I don't have a problem with distinguishing the state authority and the religious authority. As long as in the state authority there is something which is coming from the people deciding for us, through us, serving us. But what we see now with the states, yes, there is no religion. There is no the imposition of religion. But what we have now is economy deciding for us. In Europe, when I live, we have now people who are coming. We never elected them, but they are coming because of economic reasons. And the transnational corporation, where there is no democracy, are deciding for us. So the state is not under the authority of religions, but it's under the authority of other people who are deciding instead of us. So we have some questions here. Is this the true democracy that we wanted? Or is it something that, like Bill Clinton was saying when he was the president of the United States, he said, you know what, in this country, only 1% of the people are deciding. For all the others, you can go and vote, but at the end, the big decisions are taken by 1%. He was talking about the economic field, and the people who are the rich people in the country are the big the corporations. I think that these are civic questions. So I want this to be a discussion here because I'm here in a university. And if there is something that we can share with students and teachers and professors is the responsibility of academia. Academia is not only to produce thoughts, but to produce thoughts that are connected with societies. So the link between universities and cities is important. And if a student is only here to get a degree, good luck. Thank you. So.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramadan. So we have some time for questions, about half an hour. And I believe a microphone can be set up there someplace if people want to ask questions. Please go to the microphone.
Test.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for the very insightful lecture. So you mentioned a lot in the talk, words about the job, the economy, the education, and those are all really very interconnected. So the secularist, the materialistic, capitalistic economy drives efficiency, which which pushes the person in those societies to get more education and get jobs at those rates that are very fast, which is faster than the way, the rate at which ethics progress. And I'm trying to sense from this talk that you're trying to make make ethics question the legal framework and the economical framework and all those frameworks so we can make them more ethical and save our dignity. Do you think this dialogue ethical dialogues can keep up with the economics and how fast they are going? And because they derive efficiency, and efficiency is a very core value to the economics and jobs and basically this framework, the economic framework. Thank you.
I will take 3 questions and then. Yeah.
This is more of a personal question that has to do with ethics and consistency. Assuming I didn't have a student debt that I do, I would love to go on Hajj. But considering the, I guess, not so perfect human rights records of Saudi Arabia and their questionable business ethics with wars in the Middle East and supplying of oil to other questionable military forces.
It's all questionable.
The question being, how could I perform Hajj while contributing to an economy which is, as quite frankly, as to my limited knowledge, is as unethical as they come.
I don't know how I can top that, but I'll try. I think I have two questions, and I know the time is limited. The first one, frankly, is this. When did, within Islamic tradition, when did the legal side become more important than the ethical side? So to use the example of food, for example, when within the Islamic tradition did eating legally slaughtered food, i.e. halal food, without knowing the ethics behind it, become more permissible or more, I guess, seen in a better light than food that was, or I guess poultry that was well raised in a wholesome environment without knowing whether it was legally slaughtered? I don't know if that question makes sense.
When, you mean?
When and how did this transformation happen, where the legal side of it, or the ritual side of it, became more significant than the ethical side of it? And the second question is about the dichotomy of the sources, the intellect and the scriptures. That implies here that while the scriptures came from a particular source, in this case God, the intellect, it's assuming that as if it's independent of the scripture. Because most often the intellect is itself guided by the scripture. So the intellect does not remain an independent source because it's being nurtured by the scripture. So it is as if there are two sources, but they both come from a scriptural point of view. And I guess in the same light, in the same way of thinking, if a person does not have any knowledge of scriptures, and even within Muslim tradition, if a person is not well versed in Arabic or theology, and has no understanding of the scriptures, the implication here is that he will never be able to fully grasp the ethical side of Islam because he's not well versed in scriptures. So it is as if taking the understanding of ethics to an elitist level, for the lack of a better word, because now we're giving preference to the understanding of scripture when we know in a lot of cases people may not have access to it or may not in their lifetimes be able to accomplish that. If that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Can I start with the three? Okay. The first question was about the fact that we have ethics, but in the world, the real world, economy, politics, this is going very fast. So are we able to catch up with what is happening? And this is why some of the people, when they see what we are trying to do and what I'm trying to do from within the Islamic tradition, say, you are just a dreamer, just carry on, and it's not going to change. Yet, I think that never before the last century we had such ethical concerns. But in fact, it's not coming because of our free and independent will and because we are good. Now, our means are able to destroy the world. The ethical questions are coming back to us now because of, for example, what is happening with the environment. What is happening now with the environment, it can destroy all of us. And Susan George, the economist, once wrote a book, and she said, I wrote about southern countries, and I just realized that it has no impact. They don't care in the West about what is happening there. So she wrote a book about the boomerang, how it's going to affect us if we carry on working or dealing like this. So I would say yes, in the world of economy, it's going very fast. Are we able to come with an ethical ground or ethical principles and change something? It could be when, unfortunately, our reflection, our understanding that we need ethics is very much coming now from crisis. And, you even had Nicolas Sarkozy in France saying we need to moralize capitalism. So, which is, okay. But it means what? It means that the way some people are acting in the world of economy is so unethical that it's very dangerous for all of us. So what is the alternative? Don't buy this alternative coming from some Muslims saying, oh, we have the answer, Islamic economy. I don't think that there is an Islamic economy. I think that there are Islamic ethics or Islamic principles in economy. But an Islamic economy, no. It's the same economy as we have now. Which kind of ethical values we can promote. And this is why we have to come with so many other people who are working on the ground and doing very good things. I saw at the local level the best things that were produced in alternative economy in South America, in Brazil, done by Christians. And they were doing something that I was looking and say, this is it. This is Islam for me. These are my principles. So I think that we are too much intellectually segregated and self-isolating. And this is why we have to come to this understanding. About Saudi Arabia, I can understand. Where are you? Yeah. I can understand, and I would say your assessment on the country and your critical approach towards the country, I would suggest you have to keep it and to be vocal. Constructively vocal. It's not to insult, it's just to take, and I have been doing this. I can't go there. So I don't have to ask the question about, is it ethical to go to perform Hajj? And say, no. So I'm ethically banned or unethically banned. It's up to you. But if you can go, and I don't think that to go there to perform your Hajj for yourself, because there is something which is your own personal journey, that you are participating, to this economy. Anyway, even here, you are participating to an economy that is questionable in one way or in another. So I would say you are responsible within, I would say this, within the limits of what is realistic and reasonable. But I would say the intellectual and moral duty beyond this is just you can, I would say, go and perform Hajj, and then it doesn't mean that because of this you should remain silent and you should be critical. Your responsibility is not to go. Is to go with the conditions that you will never stop talking. And I would say that this is the ethical, I'm working in Qatar. And one of my conditions to be there, first I'm not paid, I'm working at Oxford, this is my position there, but was I should be free to speak my mind. And this is what I'm doing. You can see in the book I'm very critical towards what is happening there, the regime and things. But it doesn't mean you should not go, because, I'm at Oxford. Oxford is where, it's in Britain, and Britain is the British government, and the British government would say, okay, what about Iraq? I say, if you start thinking like this, you are going to end up in a mountain and in the desert, or you can't. You are responsible, and you have to take but what I like in your question is the moral duty, to study what is happening and not to keep quiet. And it means I would say there is no ethics without courage. The first ethical attitude is to be a bit courageous with what is happening, is to speak out. And there were two questions. I don't know where you are here. Yeah. Two questions. The scriptural sources, not exactly. When you are saying that the scriptural sources and the intellectual sources at the end, it's the same. In the Islamic tradition, there is, yes, there is the scriptural source, the main one, the revelation, and then there is your intellect that will grasp and will derive and draw from the scriptural sources. But on an independent way, your intellect can produce ethics. It means that it is said, why do we trust intellect? Because this is what is known in the Islamic tradition as al-fitra. Fitrat Allah allati fatara an-nas alayha is the natural yearning and the natural things that you have in yourself. It's a spark. So in fact, you know what? The mystical tradition is coming with something which is nurun ala nur, light upon light. It's the light of the revelation just joining the light of your mind. And you know how do we call the 18th century? Le siècle des Lumières is the century of lights, meaning intellect. The Islamic tradition is acknowledging this, that in fact some people with no God are producing ethical values that are acceptable, are right. It might be that your mind is not acknowledging God or even your heart, but your mind is producing something which is unacceptable or even the reality of it. It's very ethical in this. And even in you know the story about the poet who is the messenger, was someone who was not a believer, but he produced a poem which was full of beauty and dignity and very beautiful poem. And this was presented to the messenger. I said, look, this poem. And he said, beautiful. I said, you know what? He's not a believer. And he said, what he wrote is belief, even though his heart denied. Look at this. Even his beauty, and this is why some Muslims should get it right, even in arts, anything which has to do with Islamic arts is not only what is produced by Muslims. And by the way, I wouldn't say Islamic art, I would say art in Islam. And arts is something which could be independent, but the beauty itself could come from, because there is something in ourselves as human beings that is, so I wouldn't say it's just in the light of what the scriptural sources are saying when it comes to the human intellect. And what you said about, it's exactly the same. The second question is someone who is not knowledgeable about the Islamic ethics or the Islamic cannot come with something which is ethical. No, he or she can, yes. And you should not, and sometimes in some tribes and some people who don't know anything about even a revelation, you can see ethical attitudes and natural behavior that are very much ethical and that we have to accept. It's coming from the intellect, the human. And this is where you understand, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we gave dignity to human beings, means in fact that there is something in us which is dignified in itself, in our being, and which is good and could be perverted. And the spark, you know what is the meaning of kufr? Some Muslims in English, they are saying kufr is disbelief, is people are denying. No. Kufr, in fact, is veiled. In fact, there is something behind, which is the natural spark, and it's veiled. So, in fact, Iman is to remove the veil. Faith is to remove a veil. But it's not, it's bad. No. It's good intrinsically, veiled humanly, and should be unveiled spiritually. Yes? This was your two questions? I hope I had the two. Yes?
I have a question. So I want to get...
You don't want to go to the mic? This is... because you had people...
Yeah. Well, I hope it's a quick question. It's related to what you were saying near the end, the invitation to, have dialogue on specific applied areas of, let's say, industries of ethical thought. One of the, burgeoning industries in the world which almost seeks to some sort of reparation for unethical behavior in the past is the international like development scene and stuff. And I was wondering if any conversations with in your councils and stuff about humanitarian aid and that sort of thing, if there's and religion is involved in that in one way by religious organizations trying to have missions to the global south and seeing it as a religious duty to help others, but then there's the international economics and stuff that gets in it. I was wondering if it might be a specific question, but I'm wondering if there was some conversation, if you've had some conversation of this sort, the ethical framework and the religious framework around this. Thank you.
So I also have a personal question. I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give students within the academia, especially in the University of Toronto, who are trying to engage in comparative political thought or comparative political philosophy, but in an institution that is continuously teaching you a really Eurocentric way of thinking in a Western, and you're continuously learning about Western philosophers, but when you want to bring in your own ethics or your faith-based principles within your work, but that's not seen as credible academic work, and when you're continuously challenging professors in class, trying to bring in alternative way of thinking, and you're pushed back, what are students supposed to do in that situation? Because personally, me, I'm studying ethics, law, and society, and when I bring in these alternative modernities or alternative ways of thinking, it's always like, yes, we acknowledge that that's there, but for this purpose, we're just looking at the modern Western framework. So I wanted to ask what advice you would give to students without having to challenge, sacrifice their academics and grades, GPA, all that stuff.
Excuse me, Terry. If I could just step in here, I'm sorry. I was told that Terry cannot say no. So, and to please step in because he's traveled a lot in the last few days and he may be not able to answer too many questions. So I would suggest this be the last question.
The two last? Okay, the two last questions. Okay.
2 last questions. Okay.
Thank you so much. This is my protector.
First of all, thank you so much for coming in. It was really nice finally seeing you in person, which was amazing. I had a question. You touched on different topics within ethics. How would you suggest this can be incorporated practically into the society? Because we know for a fact that there are these problems here, and they need to be resolved. But is there a practical solution on how they can be incorporated within, for example, your academia, your economy, environment, etc.? Thank you.
Hello. I had a question about something you quickly mentioned during your talk. You stress the necessity of dialogue within Islam and multiple and other traditions. And I was wondering, how do you see this dialogue happening where in Islam, where traditions diverge, and when you have some persons or some traditions who cast yourself away when ideas are not shared, where visions of Islam are not shared? Thank you.
Okay. So, the first question was about the solidarity. It was you. Yeah. Yes, we have discussion, and in all I have been, just to tell you something about my own story. I started in the 80s to go to the global south, from India to Africa to South America, to work on solidarity and to try to understand. And there is something which from the beginning I understood. First is solidarity and ethics should be reconciled, because this understanding that by being or showing solidarity is by definition ethical, it's problematic. It's not as simple as this. Is where do you put solidarity and when you put humanitarian work as opposed as political solutions and as opposed as political questions? It's important because it's, you know, we had a very deep discussion in the 80s about are we not, by going with solidarity work and not to be involved in politics, in fact confirming some political positioning and decisions. So we need to get this. And the second is the whole discussion about are we working, and you know this discussion 70s and the 80s was about solidarity versus or as assistance or as promoting autonomy. And these are big questions. So we had discussion with some organizations, and I think that we need to have this as something which is the concept of human being is central to the concept of solidarity. In fact, in which way do you show solidarity towards my own weaknesses and my own status, for example, in a society? This is a critical question. Why are you showing solidarity and how do you translate this on the ground? I think that these are questions. There are some, we always have to show solidarity, but we need to give or to come with the right questions, on ethical questions. What are we doing for the sake of what? Because solidarity work could be instrumentalized by political forces, as you know. You know, I'm a Swiss citizen, and we have the Red Cross. And the Red Cross is neutrality. What is neutrality in some situation? You know, I can understand that for being efficient in the solidarity ground, you should avoid talking about politics. But who is gaining from you not talking about politics? And in some situation, you know, some humanitarian things are presented as humanitarian, where it's not really this. We need to come with the political questions. So, yes, but in our discussion, it's deeper than only, you know, solidarity as an ethical approach, or it's the deep understanding of solidarity in our contemporary world. And how do we have to deal? And it's beyond, you know, can we show solidarity with people of other faiths when we are Muslims? Of course, yes, which is a silly question. Some people, they need fatwa on this. And you know what my response to this is we need a fatwa to tell the people that on some areas you should not ask for a fatwa. We should stop. We should stop because it's very negative. The fatwa is the legal opinion that is for some. So I think that I would complexify everything which has to do with humanitarian work. You know, I'm dealing with Islamic Relief. I was involved with the Red Cross, with Terre des Hommes and Edmond Kaiser. All these people have been working in these fields for 30 years. And I really think that we need ethical questions about how it is used sometimes. We need sometimes, you know, to come with, for example, in the relationship and what is happening, the conflict in Palestine, for example. I don't want the Palestinian issue to become a humanitarian business. It has nothing to do with this. We need to do two things with the conflict between Israel and Palestine, is to stop making it a religious conflict. It has nothing to do with Jews versus Muslims. This is wrong. Anti-Semitism is anti-Islamic, and nothing can explain the conflict in religious terms. And in fact, this is why I'm asking the Christians to be much more involved, and the atheists and the agnostic to be involved by saying this is a political conflict. It's not a religious one, and it's not a humanitarian situation. The Palestinians are not poor people who need just to eat. They need justice to be free. I think that this is where we need sometimes to be very cautious not to be put. And I would say exactly the same with some African situations in Congo. We need political decisions and not to come as, you know, people who are helping some others to avoid the political discussion. Quickly, because I took too much time for the first one, is, okay, want to expose me or to expose yourself within academia. Look, I think that it's true that you have some teachers or professors within academia that are not used to something which is coming from another, you know, perspective. There is something that we should avoid. Is just a clash by saying, and some of our students sometimes they come with another perspective, but the problem is not the other perspective. The problem is it's not academic enough. I'm not saying this about you. I'm just saying that you know, it's like we have some. Oh, thank you. It's just at the end. Better late than never. Okay, that's good. Thank you so much. You know, it's like we have some, I was working at the grassroots level with some, you know, Moroccan or black citizens and residents in the Netherlands. And they were going to the job, you know, interview and say, this guy, he was a racist, he didn't want me. Say, what did you say? And when he explains, say, I'm sorry, you were not ready. He's not racist, but you cannot get the job because you are not. So, you know, we transform this into victim mentality. To anyone within academia who wants to come with something which is challenging the used or the mainstream discourse, you have to be very equipped. Very equipped. First, not to give up, to make it an academic topic, and to come with evidences, you know, primary source, secondary source. This is something that has to be, and this could be interesting. And you enter within an academic discussion, not being emotional, not being, oh, they don't like us, they think that we, no, just make it an academic topic with academic evidences and challenge. It might not work with one, it might work with someone else. So sometimes within academia, you will find that some people are not ready because a teacher or professor is a human being. He or she has his or her comfort zone. Let's say if you come and you destroy everything or you are challenging, you need to be first equipped, and second find the people who are ready and with whom you can work. But I would never say give up. And any student who is in the name of, you know, my degree, I should keep quiet on this, say yes on that, and confuse getting a degree with becoming a parrot and repeating what is said. I think that this is not the point. I think that this is where students coming with another background, another philosophy, another history, they should be this asset within Western academia. You have something to contribute, but in academic terms, not in emotional terms or with nurturing the victim mentality challenge. And I did, you know, my first PhD was in Western philosophy. And one of my teachers was Filanenko, the greatest specialist in Kant philosophy. I was always challenging him. And he was very ready to do this. He didn't like, and he liked it at the same time. But he helped me a great deal. He helped me a great deal because he helped me through the questions. And it was very difficult. Sometimes I was just coming back and saying, ooh, racist. I tell you, and he was not. He was not at all. Not at all. So much so that, you know, up to very recently I'm in touch with him. So there is something here that I would say don't give up, but make it an academy and find the right, you know, teachers, professors, that you can do this and find a way to do this. And even in a construct, if it cannot be a field that you can study, make it a field that you can discuss. Don't make it only a field where so I would say that this is a student attitude that could be helpful. And show it's credible. Show it's credible. And anyone, once again, professor who are making faith as a non-academic. You know, one of my teachers in philosophy was saying, theology is a weird topic. It's a weird discipline. It's the only discipline which has no object. Because he was an atheist. I say, you are wasting your time. And he was, you know, analytical philosophy, Mulligan he was. And no way to discuss this with him. But I think that it was not a topic that you can study with him, but he was always ready to talk about it. And I think that this is where you can find a niche where you can, but make it academic and not something that is something that you react on an emotional way. What was the question about ethical norms, that how can we incorporate? So, look, it's not easy, and I think very often in the ethical ground, in the West, in Muslim majority countries, even with scholars, I can tell you with ulama, shuyukh, very often say, yes, you know what, we have to reconnect the legal framework with ethics. They always repeat this. But on the ground, they give fatwa on the legal dimension and not on the ethical dimension. They don't really come with, you know, the way we treat animals, the way we treat, you know, for example, workers. You know, I spoke at the highest level in Qatar by saying, look, the way you treat immigrants and migrant workers in this country, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. Yes, they will have, you know, the World Cup in 22. But still, I'm sorry, if all these stadiums are going to be built with people who have no rights and are living, this is not, but scholars, they would say, they wouldn't touch this. So how do we do this is we have some institutions and we have commissions and we have committees working on this. And wherever we can, with people who are within institutions, who are aware that we need to be there, we need to respond to the question. And then in our organizations, in our daily life, as much as we can, the ethical concern, the ethical awareness should be there in our discussion. So by doing what? I would say that in philosophical terms and in religious terms, you know, in the book, The Radical Reform, I came back by saying, I came to the Islamic tradition by saying, the school that is needed for Muslims today is the school of maqasid, is the school of the objectives, questioning the objectives. In philosophical terms, if you look at all what we are doing, in the philosophical Western tradition, we have a tradition questioning the objectives. The finalities, in French, les finalités, is what do we want to achieve. And I think that this is the right way to do this. In education, in the job market, in economy, in environment, what do we want to achieve? Questioning the ends, and then with institutions and within our organization, and even within our community, we have to do this. And to try to, but I know it's difficult, and it's a world of efficiency. And you might have to start with the question, what is success? What is success? But even in our personal life and then in our social life, what is success? And what are the objectives? About how can we deal with others where, yeah. So, difficult to talk, for Muslims to talk together, to one another. This is what you mean. Lots of division. And you're right. I think if wherever I go and I deal with Muslims and Muslim communities, the first thing that they are saying is, we are divided. Now there is, you know, in the last book, The Arab Awakening, one of the main challenges that I see and I foresee for the coming generation in the Middle East, but it's going now to be the situation here as well in the West, is the relationship between Shia and Sunni. Now add to this the relationship between Sufi, literalist, reformist, rationalist divisions. So we need an intra-community dialogue. But what you are suggesting, I think it's not mutually exclusive. That we can do both, and we need to do both. We need to have internal dialogue. We need to have discussion. But we also need to have dialogue as much as we can. You are not, Christians and Jews and Buddhists, and they're not going to have discussion within the Muslim community with the literalists, because they don't really care. Or if they care, it's to convert the people they are talking to. But you can have a dialogue with, the reformists, the rationalists, the Sufi, the mystical tradition. There is a room here for dialogue, and we need this. And I would tell you something which is a reality. I experienced this, that sometimes when you talk outside, it helps you to come to talk within. Sometimes the way you are outside is helping. It could be a positive, virtuous circle that is helping you to get something within. So I wouldn't say we have first to be united. It's not going to happen. This unity is a dream. What we can have is an accepted diversity. And why I'm saying unity is a dream, because for many Muslims, unity is uniformity. Is to think the same. It's not going to happen. So unity is not going to happen in many ways. Look at the Canadian Muslims now. On political terms, they're not going to vote the same. In social terms, they don't have the same social status. This is a way which is going to deal with divisions and diversity of opinions. So we might come to something which is unity as to the faith, our faith, and accepting the diversity of thoughts. It's very difficult for some Muslims to do this. So I don't see it as something that let us just solve our problems. I think that we need to have both, and we need people in both areas to work within to get a better sense of this accepted diversity. I keep on repeating to Muslims, you should accept this diversity is part of your religion. Literalist, Salafi. You might, as a literalist who is not violent, I would stand up to say to someone who is killing an innocent people, to say this is not Islamic, it is anti-Islamic. I said it from not in 2001. I started to say this when the Swiss. It was in the 90s when for example, my fellow Swiss citizens, they were visiting Egypt and they were killed by saying this is anti-Islamic. It's not our religion. But when you have a literalist is a woman or a man that is very strict. They don't want to listen to music. They don't want to shake hands. Nothing. Okay, that's your business. That's your choice. And I understand that you can be a Muslim like this. Now I'm coming from the reformist tradition. And I'm privileging anything which has to do with the spiritual dimension. And you have Sufi and you have rationalists. Let us have this understanding. And it's an ethical behavior as well, which is we have different ways of dealing. At the same time, it's very important to deal with other traditions. And it's possible. And it's possible to come to things that, some of my best friends many of the people that I met on the road were people of other faiths and with no faith. And my point was, as long as they are witnesses of their own tradition, with or without tradition, their own principles, these are my friends. And I would say that within or outside, it's important just to be a witness. On ethical terms, a witness is try as much as possible to be consistent with your principles and your values. If you try, if you can, if it's your goal in life, this is what it means to be a witness. Within you can do it, and outside our community you should do it. But I wouldn't say that one is opposed to the other. Thank you.